doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
I've got Pete here. I'm going to bring him in. My friend, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good, Todd. How you doing?
Fantastic. So you sent me a video of General Hodges, retired U.S. Army. He was the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Am I correct?
Yes, he was from 2014 to 2017 when he retired.
Yeah, and we're talking about all these influencers out there, and we want to go through and show people the narrative on this tape. But before we do that, I want to talk to you a couple other things. I was watching that tape, and I just had the impression of how, I mean, these people really want to control the world, man. They're talking about, harming Russia, getting a war going with Europe and Russia, bringing in China. I mean, they're talking about, they've been thinking about a global conflict for a long time. And to me, that is so dishonorable as a U.S. military officer. How did they lose their soul on this thing? Do you get it?
Yeah, well, all I think normal people can do is wonder and and talk about it and try to get inside their heads. But what I see as, Todd, and we'll watch it in a second, it's a living, breathing historical example of how we, the world, as you just referenced, and specifically Ukraine, got to where they are today, which is, incredibly sad. 600,000 plus killed in action, 600,000 plus wounded, many of them seriously in action. The eastern part of the country destroyed, no economy. That's how Ukraine got there, and they got there. And what I'm talking about is paid influencers and political actors pushing propaganda, coordinated propaganda, and without any regard for facts or the reality of the situation on the ground. And then the second thing that's so sad about it is, this effort that the Trump administration has taken since they came into office in January. Priority is to stop the war, and just as shocking to people like us, it's hard to believe there's anybody against stopping this war, but yet there is. And we saw the Democratic Party meet with Zelensky and sabotage the Oval Office meeting, and then we listened to this. He's a big influencer in Europe. He talks to all the European media outlets constantly. He's one of the biggest influencers in U.S. pro-war commentary also. And it's the same thing when you listen to it. Everything is rosy. Ukraine's doing great. Russia is a paper tiger. He continues to parrot that, which it's just, again, without regard to reality. It's like these guys think that people just listen to them and not anyone else, or not, again, the reality of the situation on the ground.
So we're going to listen to this tape, and we're going to do it piece by piece because I've got some of it labeled out. But, there was a quote, the U.S. general, I think it was Westmoreland or somebody, was talking to the Vietnamese general after the war and said, you never beat us on the battlefield. And the Vietnamese general said, yeah, but that's irrelevant because we won. So I see the same situation right here. You've got these guys in their C2 cell thinking all this, Clausewitzian Sun Tzu tactics to hit Moscow and all this other stuff. And they're talking about deep fires and, lots of technical words, and they're losing the big picture because, I just found it really dishonorable that U.S. military officers in the UK and the US are talking this way. I mean, that's just what me away. So go ahead. Do you want to comment on that? Then I'll roll.
I agree with you. And I just think there should be anytime a former military person, and I'll include myself in that, but especially these generals, come on TV, they should have to, above their head should be, I'm being paid by these groups. He's on numerous NGO boards of directors.
Yeah.
He retired first off, his UCOM command is 14 to 17. That's when the Obama administration and Joe Biden overthrew the Ukrainian government in 14. And then
So he's invested
if
in
you
all this.
watch tapes of him, he proudly announces that he endorsed, Joe Biden in the 2020 election. So this is Joe Biden's war. It should be called Joe Biden's war. He's the number one expand NATO senator from 1994 on. That's feature articles in the New York Times about him leading the charge. He was in the Obama White House. He had one job, Ukraine. That's where Burisma came up, or Hunter. He ran this, and him and his mouthpieces, which is Jake Sullivan, Susan Rice, and Anthony Blinken. And again, after the Oval Office thing, the arsonists always come back to the fire. Those three were the lead Democratic Party commentators on, what a travesty it was that President Trump mistreated Zelensky. And it's the same thing going on still. They're still the ones criticizing the peace effort, but you should be able to see above their head. If they're taking money from anyone, if they're on NGO boards of directors, that should be above their head. And, you and I can just say out loud, I'm not taking any money from anyone. I'm not on any NGO board.
Me either. I take money from advertisers, but that's it.
Yeah, right. And so you're running a business, and people know that. But it's disingenuous to continue to come out and talk this way, like you're saying, especially because it has no basis in fact. And at one point in this, I'm sure we'll get to it, he talks about the interviewer asked him, POTUS came out a few weeks ago and said Ukraine started the war. How shocking is that? And he says it was gobsmacked. But they never will talk. They'll never go, of course, Ukraine didn't. Here's why. First of all, second of all, third. They'll never address it. And they're very smart at this phase. They're trying to be careful not to perjure themselves because they know how tenuous this is. So they just won't address it. They'll just say, how could Trump say that? He's wrong.
They won't say Kamala Harris went to Brussels a week before 22 invasion and said Ukraine's going to be part of NATO, which Putin had been saying we need security guarantees. They can't be part of NATO. I mean, you can blame Putin for invading, but you have to understand what they were saying, right? I mean, that you just have to understand that is a red line. He would lose power if Ukraine went and became part of NATO. I mean, the Russian people, Russian oligarchy would not accept that, and Putin would be gone.
Well, and it's even the NATO thing, is like the poster. It's no NATO, but it's bigger than that. We would not allow China and North Korea and Iran to send hundreds of advisors into Mexico to actively work against American interests, to be engaged in low-level combat, sabotage. It's preposterous, and that's what
we had a thing called the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah,
and so all you have to do is put our country in their shoes, and it's not an invasion. We overthrew the U.S. and the EU overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine. And as I said in my first paper on the chronology, the history of what's happened in the Ukraine war, the Russians did the same thing we do if China moved in and took over the Panama Canal. They'd come in, first off, they had people there, so they would defend it, and they would take it right back because it is an integral part of their country. They created it. It's always been Russian. And so, when we did it, they also heard on the intercepted transmissions between
Famous phone
Newland
call. Right.
and Payette. Right. Not just that one. There were many others. And in most of those, the big CIA prize was Crimea and the port and the Black Sea, cutting off the Black Sea access to Russia. That was the cherry on top of the cake for this whole thing.
They wanted that part of their empire. I'm listening to this guy. We'll get to it here shortly, but he's saying, we need to defeat Russia because then we can work on Iran. So he's taking all this training he received from the U.S. military, all of this fantastic education, martial training on strategy and everything, and he's applying it for an empire that has nothing to do with the American people. I mean, it's fascinating to watch. We're going to play this first one, and then we'll talk about it. Then we'll take a break and come back for the rest. But here we go. This is the interviewer, who's a globalist influencer himself in the UK, obviously, and General Hodges.
Had this week, POTUS say that Ukraine started the war. Why are his advisors not correcting him? Does he really believe that?
What a great question. Of course, I was gobsmacked when I heard him say that myself, and it's very frustrating because it's clear that the White House, this administration, has taken the Russian side, and that they parrot Kremlin talking points better than Lavrov. I can't figure out exactly what this is about. I don't know that there's some deep psychological reason for it, and I don't believe that the president is a Russian asset, not an intentional asset as is sometimes described. I just think he has doesn't appreciate or respect what's at stake with Ukraine, with its history, its geography, why this matters for Europe, frankly, why it matters for the United States. I hate to say this, I don't think he even cares. And I think there's also probably some hangover from his first administration when he tried to bribe or blackmail, I should say, President Zelensky ahead of the re-election campaign against Joe Biden. And I think he's still angry about that. So all of these things, unfortunately, are part of the mix rather than really clear strategic thinking.
So, Pete, I mean, he's just, like you said, ignoring everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, like a classic propagandist, you don't ever address the facts. He said nothing right there. He was gobsmacked. I'm not even sure what that is. But a normal, truthful response would be something like this. I was confused or shocked. Of course, Ukraine didn't start the war. And here's why. First of all, secondly, and thirdly. But you'll notice they never do that because they can't.
You mean like they didn't start the war, but there was reasons that Russia invaded?
Well, if he has a different opinion, if he says they're saying POTUS was wrong and for saying that, and he's not wrong, he's correct. These were Ukrainian politicians who thought it was a good idea to use the neo-Nazis as the tip of the spear in this thing. And that's what happened. The neo-Nazis ran the government in the vacuum after the overthrow, and they began the civil war, which quickly turned into an ethnic war, which quickly, the tactic of choice, ethnic cleansing occurred. And once that began, it was all over. They were never going to get Eastern Ukraine back. Those are ethnic Russians.
For our audience sake, you're talking. There was ethnic cleansing by Ukrainians against Russian-speaking people.
Yes, against the ethnic Russians who live in Eastern Ukraine. And again, another reason why the media doesn't cover this war is the ground combat, the battle zone, is the people who live there are all ethnic Russians. All the destruction you see, no Ukrainians, non-ethnic Russian Ukrainians have had their towns leveled, and you're seeing the rubble of Eastern Ukraine, which is where all the ethnic Russians lived. And because they started that ethnic war against them, that's what immediately rallied Donbass and Crimea to organize referendums and then have 80 to 90% voter turnout and 80-90% support for independence, autonomy, at first for Donbass, and then alignment with Russia as they continued to bombard them and kill them for 7 years, from 14 to 17.
Yeah,
so
it's been going on since 2014.
yeah, so they never addressed that. And then to bring up the Zelensky thing, which has been proven to be a massive con job again by the Democratic Party. Joe Biden's on tape talking about using $1 billion as a carrot. Either you do what we say and stop investigating Burisma, or we're not giving you $1 billion in aid. He's on tape saying that.
Yeah.
And so for this guy to come out and just reference it like it's a fact, again, without using any facts,
Gotcha.
it's hard to watch.
Pete, we'll be right back. We're going to take a break. We'll delve into more General Hodges' nefarious comments. Be right back. Welcome back to the Skiff. I'm here with Pete Blaber. Please put CDM.press in your daily scan, morning, noon, and night. It's the best way you can help us bring us traffic. Tell your friends, tell one person a day about CDM. But we're the new wire service without the globalist spin. We're also on podcast anywhere. We're on X, Gettr, Rumble. Please catch the show and tell people about it. Pete, I'm going to play another clip from General Hodges, and this one is about Steve Witkoff, which I found interesting.
I think, first of all, anybody that's watching the this administration has to recognize that they do nothing that is in accordance with normal convention, tradition, how to even act presidential. I mean, it's so different from everything we've known in the past. And so, eventually we'll get used to it. And while it drives me crazy because I see an assault on our Constitution almost daily, and as well as on our allies, and on what I think are our strategic interests. The fact is, he's the elected president, and that's who we've got to deal with until there are new elections.
Well, I'm glad you see that. So it's not just me getting confused through naivety.
No. It's difficult to. It's hard to watch. I mean, there's no other way for me to describe it. But it's not just him. I mean, he's obviously enabled by a coterie of people around him who I would describe as different from Trump. One, he now has made sure that the only people around him are those who will agree with him or who will carry out what he wants. Now, what you've described when it comes to foreign policy is an interesting situation. And I think that you've got a case where who does what is not necessarily the traditional way of doing it. Almost every president has a special envoy for specific tasks. That in and of itself is not unique, but it's clear, or at least it looks to me, that the Secretary of State is not the one organizing and coordinating foreign policy on behalf of the president. Mr. Witkoff is involved. He clearly is in over his head. He's not the right person to be doing this. But it almost doesn't matter because President Trump's voice is the only one that actually matters.
So, Pete, I don't listen to Witkoff because he's not doing what the State Department wants. The State Department is full of communists and wants forever wars, right?
Right. Yeah. Again, the most auspicious thing about what he says is that there's no facts. And classic propaganda is accusations and name calling. It's all about emotions and about creating fear. So, he references where there a daily constitutional crisis in the U.S. and mistreatment of Europe. Name one. One constitutional crisis or mistreatment of allies. He references this coterie around him that's manipulating him. Name one. Name who is J.D. Vance supposedly manipulating the president. Again, when you just listen and with the filter on of, okay, when does he actually say a fact? When does he actually give an example? He never does. And that's, again, hallmarks of propaganda, paid influencers. They just talk mishmash, wishy-washy stuff, but it's the two overriding principles are accusations and name calling. And you just saw that could be a classroom, a video for classroom instruction on propaganda.
Yeah, completely. So this next clip is him talking about Russia, essentially. So let's listen to this.
Yep.
First of all, you've got too many people that don't understand the geography and don't appreciate the nature of war in general and the character of this particular war. If I've been seeing reports now for 3 years about how there's no way Russia could lose. They just too big, too many. Ukraine has all these problems, and people have lost sight of the fact that Ukrainians are fighting for their life, for their survival. They're literally defending their homeland. And also, even when the president yells at President Zelensky and says, "You got no cards." I mean, well, the Taliban had no cards against us, but they certainly won. The Viet Cong had no cards against us. They won. And so history is full of examples of where small, outnumbered, ragged armies or whatever defeated, on paper, much larger armies and navies. I was thinking, I heard this today. Somebody said the last time that an empire tried to save the crown jewel of the empire was when France tried to hang on to Algeria. They killed 1 million Algerians, and the Algerians did not buckle. So I think we need to take a look and understand what the Ukrainians are doing. And then when you look at the Russian economy and what they're doing, how they're grabbing people off the street. These Chinese soldiers are the latest example. But soldiers are going into the attack on golf carts and civilian cars. They just don't have anything.
Pete, the bullshit detector just went way up here.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Did he just say that Russia's grabbing people off the streets? We played that cold open in the beginning.
Yeah, and they're going into combat on golf carts. And so, and this is why I tell people, go on to the Telegram channel and watch raw videos from the Russian side. There's a few good reporters on the ground, independent journalists, but just raw videos from the Russian side, and you'll immediately discredit everything he just said. But he, again, you don't have to go full Monty with guys driving in on golf carts. It's preposterous. But again, I tried to write down as many as I could. He starts with, people don't understand the geography. Tell us what they don't understand about the geography. Yeah. And then he says, or the nature or the character of the war of Ukraine. What part of that are you referencing?
They're not buying his bullshit.
Exactly. And then he does a non sequitur, again, just makes up this thing about the Oval Office disagreement and Trump saying to him, "You don't have cards." Well, if we were to had that clip, we could play it. He's talking about the negotiation. You don't have the card. What Trump was saying to him, and you could hear it between sound bites, was you don't have the negotiation cards. You're losing. You're on your heels right now, leaning backwards, and the Russians are continuing to push forward. That's all he was saying. But this guy turns it into the NBA won, the Algerians won, and they didn't have any cards either. And of course, that's war he's talking about. That's combat. They won on the ground. And with the case of the Vietnamese after we left, it was pretty obvious.
I just found it shocking that he accused the Russians of pulling people off the street. I've probably played 5 videos of them. Their their bounty hunters pulling kids off the street in Ukraine, sending them to the front. These these are not even. This is a private organization they did in Ukraine. There's not even military recruiters. They're pulling them in, and they're not even part of the Ukrainian military. They're throwing them up in some private formations that don't even
It's
get.
horrific. It's horrific,
amazing.
Todd. And and again, to all our viewers, uh, find a point in history where any military that was victorious had to force its people to fight, had to pull them off the street. There's numerous guys have been killed in these confrontations. That a lot of them do turn into shootouts because guys are carrying weapons with them, trying to get out of Ukraine. Name one example of that. You can't. The second thing is Russian recruitment is through the roof. And they do interviews. There's interviews with guys. When did you join? I joined when I saw the massacre in Odessa on TV. That's when I went down. And what he's doing is misleading. He's misleading the world. Russia, everything they tried to do with this war, they achieved the opposite of. They wanted to break Russia apart, create internal dissent, which would lead to the overthrow of Putin. What they've done is created probably the most unified country on the planet right now. Every country goes through cycles, but Russia, you can say, is at the very apex, and they are completely united, motivated. Support for Putin is through the roof. And, another thing we don't talk about, which I think is incredibly significant, is this is the first time in modern history where we've seen Muslims and Christians fighting together in not just a unified way, but in a very functional, healthy way. And again, I think that's another positive thing that's come out of this.
30% of Russia is Muslim. People don't realize that.
And they're some of the most committed. The Abdi Alatanov is the lieutenant general in commands Akhmat Special Forces. They're one of the most effective fighting forces on the battlefield, and he puts out posts every day, videos every day. He talks about God and country, kind of a familiar theme for warriors. So again, it's so disingenuous what he's saying, and it's hugely net negative because people listen to that, and he should be educating people. He should be talking about the reality on the ground, not this 2015 propaganda version of how we're going to hold this lie together, which is
there's a whole nother. You bring up some good points, but it made me think of something else. There's a whole nother level here. During the 90s, when the Soviet Union fell, the Russians went through 15 years of hell, essentially gang warfare, wild west, no safety, high crime, looting. I mean, that's when all the oligarchs were born. You had everybody with bodyguards, all of gunfights, rapes. All that was bad during the 90s. They don't want to go back. This is vengeance for them. They're thinking now we won and the United States is going to fall apart. And that's what these globalists have done, is push that on our republic, and it angers me to no end. Pete, we're going to take a break. You can stay for one more segment, right? We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Skiff. I'm here with Pete Blaber, former Delta Force commander. Pete, this is another clip. I'm going to play this and we can talk about it again. 1 second.
The necessity yet, but certainly, as General Sakir said, you can defeat Russia's advantage of mass with precision if you have enough time. And by that, of course, he's talking about you go after headquarters, you go after logistics, you go after their long-range fires, their bases. And I think the Ukrainians also recognize that Russia is only able to stay in this war as long as they can export oil and gas to China and India. So wrecking Russia's oil and gas infrastructure would be the equivalent of strategic bombing. And I think one of the most fascinating aspects of this war is how Ukraine has grown its defense industry during the war, despite.
So, Pete, he's talking strategic bombing. He wants to destroy Russia's infrastructure. I mean, the disclosures are coming out here. This is what this is about, right?
Yeah.
Cutting off Russia's economy.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about the people of Ukraine. They don't give a shit about the people of Ukraine.
No.
Killed them all. This is about something much bigger. I found that really interesting. What say you?
Yeah, I agree. It's and that's why too often we use the term NATO to describe the European interests, and that's not accurate. The EU it is the best way to describe why the Europeans are all in on this. The EU saw and sees Ukraine as the greatest addition that they could possibly add to bring the EU on par with the United States and China as an economic superpower. And so, the gas and oil is a big part of what they were after in the beginning. That's why Burisma, Biden went right in February of 2014 and got that job for Hunter on Burisma, because they saw this as energy independence for the EU also. So, him talking that, and again, the gobbledygook, he quotes someone as saying, mass can be defeated by precision as long as you have time. Okay, what does that mean?
It was 10-1 population advantage. Russia.
Yeah, at what
How much time do you
What,
need, dude?
yeah, 100 years. I mean, and then it's just bizarre beyond belief. But that's what, again, it's important. It should be a bio above his head. Sock year 2014 to 2017. So the Ukrainian government was overthrown by the EU and US in 2014. Yep. Yeah. And then endorsed Biden. It's Biden's war. He's been all in. He's got no other option but to just come up with far-fetched reasons why we should continue to support, because maybe something will happen and all of these individuals who took part in this will have an out. But right now, they don't see an out. So they're willing to get more and more preposterous.
They're willing to risk humanity's future, World War III,
yes.
for their own freaking
for their own legacy, reputation, and to stay out of jail, probably.
Unbelievable. All right, here's one more, which is another part of this, which I believe is about the Black Sea.
Sure, to make changes necessary when you had to do it. Now, I don't want to paint the Ukrainian side as having done everything exactly right. Obviously, they haven't. General Zaluzhny, when he was, of course, now Ambassador Zaluzhny, but when he was General Zaluzhny, he worked very hard to try and change that old Soviet culture that was in the Ukrainian armed forces, particularly at the higher levels. He worked very hard to change that. And I think General Syrskyi, of course, is continuing to do that as well, even though he's a pretty tough old guy himself. The thing is, the Ukrainians had no choice but to unleash the talent of their young people. The vast majority of the army are people that joined within the last 3 years. So it's not like it's a big, huge, old professional force. And so the nature, the character of this war, and the fact that they have been outnumbered so much, so vastly, they've had to find ways to counter Russia's advantage of mass. The best example we've seen, of course, and well, let me say it this way. There are several very good examples. At sea, the fact that Ukraine was able to basically defeat the Black Sea Fleet, even though Ukraine had no traditional navy of their own anymore, that's because of a combination of,
Pete, that wasn't Ukraine who defeated the Black Sea Fleet.
No.
That was the U.S. Military. Am I right?
U.S. Navy and the CIA specifically, and that's in the New York Times article where they're, the attempt to brag about what they do actually exposes how wrong they were. And it was U.S. Navy, all source intelligence, ISR assets,
yes,
drones, the cutting edge drones, and of course CIA operating, naval. Their equivalent of ground branch is naval branch, which they have.
They sunk the Moskva, which was one of the leading Russian warships. I mean, unbelievable. I mean,
yep,
that wasn't That wasn't Joe Bag of Donuts in his garage in Ukraine.
Right.
Here's one more clip on the Kursk incursion, which I found interesting.
Assuming that, well, Russia's winning, they're just keeping marching in the east. But the Ukrainian general staff looked at the map and said, wait a minute, they barely moved in months and only at enormous casualties. So they were pretty sure they could accept risk in the east, although it would suck to be a young company commander out near between Pokrovsk and Avdiivka, in order to build up force to launch an operational strike into Kursk. And they were there for months. These are the kind of things that I think only creative, innovative leadership and a willingness to take risk can do.
So in Kursk, they lost 70,000 troops and probably 3,000 or 4,000 armored vehicles. The Ukrainians did. The Russians lost a lot too. The Russians, they did this feint trying to pull Russian forces out of Donetsk. By the way, the slowness, I think Russia was waiting on Trump to get into office. I don't think they were in any hurry to advance on Kiev. I mean, yeah, they can't take all of Donbass. They don't have the structure without huge loss. But I think there's two subjects. One, they were going slow on purpose, and number two, the Kursk incursion was a disaster for the Ukrainian forces. Am I right?
You're absolutely right, and he calls it creative and courageous. With no facts, 69,000 men. We lost 58,000 in Vietnam over 15 years. So 69,000 men, around 4,000 vehicles. You can see all the
troops, their best equipment.
Yeah, their best troops, and he calls that courageous. Again, even what he said before that about the military. Most of the military's only been in since 2022. Okay, so you're saying most of Ukraine military is less than 3 years old. That's another massive red flag. That means they have no NCO Corps, no officers who have grown up through the system. And the individual he talks about, who's a general, who's a diplomat now, he was thrown out because by Zelensky. He was pushed out. Zelensky saw him as the biggest threat to him is at the presidential level. There was also a conflict between him and Syrskyi during the 22 and 23 counteroffensives. And so, their own military is at odds with each other. They can't decide what to do. He obviously had a hand in Kursk. The only way you could talk about it that way is if you were one of the ones who came up with the concept. And it was a massive strategic error that they cannot recover from because, like you said, those were their best brigades and they were defeated wholesale. Again, it's important to say it because this is not like an intellectual debate. This is about thousands of men being killed every day for no reason and in a war that was started by a bunch of white-collar admin diplomats who don't give one crap about Ukraine or about people in general. They only care about power and globalism. And so it's a sad thing, but the fact they never talk about it again is incredibly revealing as to what his true motivation is for even bringing it up.
Yeah, well, this is all narrative control on their part. I mean, the war is, from a military standpoint, is over. But Zelensky today torpedoed the talks in London, and Rubio and the UK foreign minister just backed out and said it's not worth it. I think we're moving to a point where the U.S. is going to withdraw from that negotiations because Zelensky doesn't want peace. And I think they're going to stop all U.S. involvement, or at least a lot of it, and then negotiate with Russia on economic terms and let Europe do what they want to do. I think Europe is not working for us. They're working for China. All this is for China and to weaken the United States military, and we need to end it right away. So I think this is all narrative control. Pete, we're out of time for this segment. You're a wealth of insight just from experience on the ground and infantry and specialized infantry and special ops. So thank you for coming on. We will have you back. You're popular on the show, so thanks for your time, Pete. I know you're busy. Take care.
Yep.